Sound of a high-voltage electrical arc, followed by a sudden dead silence. Voiceover. Calm, cold fury. She said my charger was for the public good. That I was selfish. Entitled. She didn't know my last job was designing digital fortresses. And she just declared war on the one man in this town you don't ever want to cross. She thought she was stealing electricity. But she was about to lose so much more. The first time it happened, Marcus assumed it was a mistake. An honest, albeit bizarre, misunderstanding. He'd pulled his graphite gray sedan into the driveway after a grueling 10-hour shift at the cybersecurity. Firm. His mind still untangling the knots of a particularly nasty ransomware attack. He was already calculating the minutes until he could plug in his car, pour a glass of bourbon, and let the day dissolve. That's when he saw it. A gleaming, pearl-white SUV, identical to his own model, parked at a slight angle next to his garage. It was brazenly, unapologetically occupying the very spot where his wife, Sarah, usually parked. But the real violation was the thick black cable snaking from the high-end charging station he'd installed just last month. The glowing green. Light on the unit indicated a successful connection. Someone was stealing his electricity, right in his own driveway. He killed the engine, a slow burn starting in his chest. This was Westmere Heights, a neighborhood of manicured lawns and unspoken rules where the fiercest conflicts were usually waged over the precise height of a hedge. This was a different level of audacity. He got out, the quiet suburban street, amplifying the soft crunch of his dress shoes on the pavement. He walked over to the offending vehicle, peering through the tinted window. Empty. A resident parking sticker on the windshield confirmed the car belonged to someone in the neighborhood. He followed the cable back to his charger, atop of the line. Wall Pulse Pro he'd paid a small fortune for. It was his. He'd spent a full weekend trenching the line and wiring it into his home's main panel. A flicker of movement from across the street caught his eye. A woman was wrestling a ridiculously large inflatable flamingo from her front lawn, her face a mask of suburban determination. He recognized her from the HOA welcome email, Carol, from 2 houses down. Marcus took a deep breath, forcing a neutral expression. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice calm but firm. Carol looked up, her hand on the flamingo's plastic neck. She was in her late 40s with a severe blonde bob that looked like it could cut glass and an athleisure outfit that probably cost more than his first car. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting he was interrupting something of grave importance. "Hi, Marcus Weaver from number 84, he said, gesturing to his house. "I think you might have accidentally parked in my driveway and, plugged into my charger." He expected a flush of embarrassment, a flurry of apologies. He got a blank stare. "Oh, that's yours?" she said, not a hint of remorse in her voice. "I saw it from the street. It's a fast charger, isn't it? A level 2? "It is," Marcus said, his politeness starting to fray. "And it's connected to my private electrical panel." Carol finally let go of the flamingo, which immediately listed to one side. She brushed off her hands and sauntered across the street, her sneakers making no sound on the asphalt. She moved with an air of unearned authority, as if the entire block was her personal fiefdom. "Well, that's wonderful," she said, stopping beside her SUV. She patted the hood like it was a prized stallion. "It's about time someone in. This neighborhood invested in the community's green infrastructure." Marcus blinked. "The community's infrastructure? This is my house. I paid for this. And we all appreciate it," she said with a saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I was on my way home and saw my battery was nearly empty. I figured, why let a perfectly good charger sit idle? It's for the good of the planet after all." The sheer, unadulterated entitlement was breathtaking. He felt like he was in a nature documentary observing a species with no concept of social cues or private property. "I need to charge my own car," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "I have an early meeting 2 hours away tomorrow." Carol sighed, a theatrical display of profound inconvenience. "Fine," she clipped, popping the trunk to retrieve her purse. But really, you should be more open to sharing. It's the responsible thing to do. She unlocked the car, and with a soft click, the charging handle disengaged. She unplugged the cable and let it drop to the concrete with a thud that made Marcus wince. Without another word, she got in her SUV, backed out of his driveway, leaving, a faint tire mark on his pristine pavers, and drove the 100 feet to her own. Marcus stood there for a long moment, the dropped cable looking like a dead serpent at his feet. He picked it up, dusted it off, and plugged it into his own car. The light on the unit blinked, then turned a steady, reassuring green. He went inside, the story already forming in his mind for Sarah, convinced it was a one-time fluke. An encounter with the neighborhood eccentric. He was wrong. 3 days later, it happened again. This time, it was worse. He and Sarah were coming home from a dinner out, looking forward to a quiet evening. The white SUV was there, once again leeching power from his wall, but this time it was blocking his car in. His sedan was still in, the garage, and the SUV was parked directly behind it, leaving him no way to get out. "You have got to be kidding me," Sarah said, her voice a low hiss. "Did you talk to her?" "I did." "I thought we had an understanding," Marcus said, the slow burn in his chest roaring back to life. "An understanding that private property is, private." He stormed across the street, Sarah trailing behind him. He didn't bother with pleasantries this time, rapping his knuckles sharply on Carol's ornate front door. A moment later, a harried-looking man with a kind face and a defeated posture opened it. Bill, Carol's husband. "Oh, hello, Marcus," he said, forcing a weak smile. "Everything okay?" "No, Bill, it's not," Marcus said, pointing a thumb over his shoulder. "Your wife has parked in my driveway again. She's blocking my car in, and she's using my charger." Bill's face fell. "Oh, dear. She said you'd worked something out. A sharing arrangement." "A sharing arrangement?" Marcus echoed, his voice rising with incredulity. "The arrangement was that she doesn't park on my property and steal my electricity. That's the arrangement." From behind Bill, Carol appeared, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What is all the shouting about? You're making a scene." "Marcus." "I'm making a scene?" he shot back. "You've trapped my car in my own garage. I could have an emergency. I could need to get out of here." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she scoffed, pushing past her husband. "I was just getting a top-up. I would have been gone in an hour. If you had an emergency, you could have just come and asked me to move. It's called being a neighbor. Being a neighbor doesn't mean you get to use my home as your personal gas station," Sarah chimed in, her arms crossed. "What you're doing is illegal. It's theft, and it's trespassing." Carol's eyes narrowed. "Don't you dare lecture me about legality. This is a community. We look out for each other. I see you got that new high-speed internet installed. Are you sharing the Wi-Fi password? No. It's this kind of selfish attitude that's ruining this country. People like you, with your gates and your passwords and your private property." Marcus felt a vein throb in his temple. He was arguing with a phantom, a person whose reality was built on a foundation of pure, unassailable self-interest. Logic was useless here. "Move your car, Carol," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Now." "Or what?" she challenged, a smirk playing on her lips. "Or I'm calling the police." And a tow truck. Her smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of fury. "You wouldn't dare! Try me!" For a tense moment, they stood in a silent standoff on her perfectly manicured lawn. Bill looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. Finally, with a dramatic huff, Carol spun around. "Fine, but I'm reporting you to the HOA for creating a hostile environment," she snapped, stomping back to her car. She moved it, peeling out of his driveway with a squeal of tires that was deliberately, performatively loud. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the woman's words echoing in his head. Or what? She had challenged. Him. She believed there were no consequences. She believed she could do whatever she wanted, and the most he could do was threaten and yell. She saw his civility as weakness. A cold, precise anger began to solidify in his gut. He wasn't just a homeowner, he was a systems architect for a living. He built digital walls and traps for people far more sophisticated than Carol. He designed systems that didn't just block intruders, but punished them. Systems that learned, adapted, and retaliated. He slipped out of bed and went to his home office, the glow of his triple monitor setup illuminating the dark room. He pulled up the specs for his Wall Pulse Pro charger. It was a smart device, connected to his home network with a robust API, an application programming interface, a digital backdoor meant for diagnostics and control. To a layman, it was a way to check his charging status on his phone. To Marcus, it was a weapon waiting to be armed. His fingers flew across the keyboard, the clicks and clacks a quiet staccato in the sleeping house. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a programmer. He started writing a script, a custom piece, of code he named Project Nightshade. It was elegant in its simplicity. First, the charger would identify the unique digital handshake of any vehicle that plugged. An hour passed, then another. From his office window, Marcus could see the twilight bleed into a deep suburban dark, the streetlights casting lonely pools of orange onto the pavement. The white SUV sat silently, a pale ghost tethered to his garage. He'd finished his work, filed his reports, and was now idly debugging a piece of code for a personal project. He was in no hurry. The trap was silent, patient, and absolute. The first sign of trouble was the flicker of Carol's porch light, followed by the opening of her front door. She emerged, phone to her ear, laughing about something. She had a gym bag slung over her shoulder. Late yoga class, perhaps. She walked with that same brisk, self-important gait, keys jangling in her hand. Marcus minimized his work screen, pulling up the security camera feed to full screen. This was the moment. Carol clicked her key fob. The SUV's lights flashed. She opened the driver's side door, tossed her bag onto the passenger seat, then walked to the charging port. She gripped the handle of his charging cable and pulled. It didn't budge. She frowned, a slight crack in her serene facade. She pulled again, harder this time, jiggling it with an impatient flick of her wrist. The thick cable held fast, the connector, remaining firmly seated in her car's port. The little indicator light next to it, which should have been pulsing blue to show it was charging, was completely dark. "What the?" Her voice was too faint for the camera's microphone to pick up, but her body language spoke volumes. Annoyance was quickly curdling into confusion. She tried the release button inside the car. Marcus, who had the wiring diagrams for her vehicle model memorized, knew this would do nothing. The manual release was overridden by the fault condition. He watched her get in and out of the car 3 times, her movements becoming increasingly frantic. She jabbed at the car's large touchscreen display, her face illuminated by its glow. She was searching for a software-based release. She wouldn't find one that worked. The theatrical sigh came next. She placed her hands on her hips, glared at the charger on the wall as if it had personally offended her, and then marched directly toward his front door. Marcus muted the camera's audio feed and waited. He didn't get up. He let the doorbell ring, a sharp, insistent chime that echoed through the quiet house. He let it ring a second time, giving her a few extra moments to stew in her own self-inflicted predicament. Finally, he rose and walked calmly to the door, schooling his features, into a mask of mild, neighborly concern. He opened it to find Carol standing on his porch, her face a thundercloud. Her husband, Bill, hovered nervously behind her on the walkway, looking like a man summoned to his own execution. "Your charger?" she began, dispensing with any greeting. "Broke my car." Marcus feigned surprise. I'm sorry, what? What are you talking about? It won't let go of the cable, she snapped, pointing a perfectly manicured finger back at her immobilized SUV. It's stuck. I have a class in 20 minutes. I pushed the button, it's locked in. There. What did you do? What did I do? Marcus asked, his voice a study in calm confusion. He leaned past her to look at the car, then at his charger. That's very strange. It was working perfectly for me this afternoon. Well, it's not working now. It's damaged my vehicle. You need to fix this. Immediately. Bill stepped forward, wringing his hands. We're really sorry to bother you, Marcus. It won't come out. We thought maybe you knew if there was a trick to it or something. There's no trick, Bill, Marcus said, his tone softening slightly for the beleaguered husband, before hardening again as he looked at Carol. It's a standard J1772 connector. You press the button on the handle, the latch retracts, and you pull it out, unless, of course, the car itself is preventing the release. The car was fine, until I plugged it into this cheap piece of junk, Carol insisted, gesturing wildly at the Wall Pulse Pro. Marcus had to suppress a smile. The charger cost over $2,000 and was widely considered the best on the market. That's one of the highest-rated residential chargers available. Carol, it has numerous safety features. Perhaps one of them was triggered. Triggered by what? She demanded. Here it was, the moment to tighten the snare. Well, it's a smart charger, he began, adopting the patient, slightly condescending tone of a tech support specialist. It communicates with the vehicle it's connected to. It monitors the power grid for surges, variances, brownouts, and it also logs every session. It knows which vehicle is connected. If it detects a device that is unauthorized or a connection that creates an unstable power draw, its primary protocol is to protect both the vehicle and the home's electrical system. Carol's eyes narrowed, a flicker of understanding and fear dawning in them. What are you saying? I'm saying, Marcus continued, choosing his words with surgical precision, that if the charger detected a serious anomaly, it might have sent a fault signal to your car. Most high-end EVs like yours have a safety feature for that exact scenario. In the event of a critical power fault, the car physically locks the charging cable in place to prevent a user from, for example, pulling out a live wire and getting electrocuted. It's a fail-safe. The color drained from Carol's face. Bill looked horrified. Electrocuted? Is it dangerous? Not anymore, Marcus said reassuringly. Because the other thing the charger does is immediately trip its internal breaker and kill the power flow. The lock is just a mechanical side effect of the digital emergency brake being pulled. Your car thinks it just avoided a catastrophe, and it won't let go of the source of the danger until it's told that everything is safe. Carol stared at him, her mind clearly racing, connecting the dots he was so carefully laying out for her. The smug superiority was gone, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. So, how do we get it out? She asked, her voice much smaller now. That's the difficult part, Marcus said, leaning against the doorframe, projecting an air of thoughtful reluctance. That fault code has to be cleared. The charger has to send an all-clear signal to your car's computer. Only then will the car release the mechanical lock. Trying to force it out would be a very, very bad idea. You could damage the charging port, the onboard controller, maybe even the battery management system. I saw a guy on a forum do that once. It was a $20,000 repair. Bill let out a small, strangled gasp. Carol looked like she was going to be sick. Then clear it, she demanded, a hint of her old fire returning. Get on your little app and fix it. Marcus held up his hands. I can't do that, Carol. What do you mean you can't? It's your machine. Exactly. It's my machine, and it's telling me there was a dangerous fault condition linked to your specific unauthorized vehicle. If I were to manually override that safety protocol, I'd be taking on all the liability. If anything, and I mean anything, goes wrong with your Car's electrical system from this point forward, your lawyers would have a field day. They'd say I bypassed a critical safety warning. I simply can't take that risk." He let the word liability hang in the air between them. It was a word people like Carol understood. It was a word she used as a weapon. Now, it was his shield. "So what are we supposed to do?" Bill pleaded. "Just leave it here?" "You could call the dealership," Marcus offered with a shrug. "They could send a certified technician. They'd probably have to tow it to the service center to run a full diagnostic. Or you could call an EV specialist, but I imagine an emergency house call would be pricey." The silence that followed was thick with the weight of Carol's defeat. She understood now. She was completely and utterly trapped, not by a simple mechanical failure, but by a complex web of logic and liability he had expertly woven around her. She had no recourse. She couldn't blame him without admitting she was trespassing. She couldn't demand he fix it without absolving him of all responsibility. She had boxed herself in. She stood on his porch for a full minute, her jaw clenched, her mind working furiously to find an escape route where none existed. Finally, she seemed to deflate, the fight draining out of her. "What do you want, Marcus?" she asked, her voice a low whisper of surrender. Marcus's expression remained, neutral, but inside a cold wave of victory washed over him. This was the moment he had been waiting for. "What I want," he said, his voice dropping to a calm, businesslike tone, "is for this to never happen again. What I want is to be able to park in my own driveway and use my own property without having to police it. But since we're past that point, we need to address the immediate situation." He stepped back from the door. "Hold on a moment." He disappeared into the house, leaving Carol and Bill standing in confused silence on his porch. He walked to his office, sat at his desk, and opened a word processor. He typed for a few minutes, his fingers moving with swift efficiency. He created a simple, clean document, then printed it. He also grabbed a small receipt book he used for freelance work. When he returned to the door, he was holding 2 pieces of paper. "This is a simple trespass agreement," he said, handing the first page to Carol. "It states that you acknowledge the charger is private property, that you accessed it without permission, and that you agree never to park on my property or use any of my utilities again. Sign it." Carol stared at the paper as if it were coated in poison. "And this," he said, holding up the receipt book, "is the invoice." The invoice?" Bill stammered. "Yes," Marcus said coolly. "You see, when you called me to your vehicle to diagnose." The pen in Marcus's hand felt as heavy as a gavel. The 2 pieces of paper he held were a verdict and a sentence. Carol stared at them, her face a canvas of warring emotions: incandescent rage, stark disbelief, and the icy, creeping tendrils of humiliation. For a woman whose entire life was built on a foundation of perceived status and unwavering self-importance, this was a public demolition of her entire worldview. This is criminal," she finally managed to say, her voice trembling with fury. "I'm not paying you a cent. I'm calling my lawyer." "Please do," Marcus said, his voice utterly devoid of emotion. He pulled his phone from his pocket. "In fact, let's get him on speakerphone. I'd love to have a recorded conversation where you and your legal counsel acknowledge that you were trespassing on my property and attempting to steal utilities, which is a misdemeanor in this state. I'm sure that will be a productive start to your lawsuit against my faulty equipment." He gestured to the security camera above his garage. "My system archives all footage to a secure cloud server. We can review the tapes of all 3 of your visits together. It'll be fun." Every word was a perfectly aimed shot, dismantling her defenses one by one. The mention of archived footage seemed to land like a physical blow. Carol flinched, her eyes darting up to the small, dark lens of the camera. It was a silent, impartial witness to her every action. Bill, who had been a statue of misery, finally broke. "Carol, just pay the man," he pleaded, his voice cracking. Please, let's just go home. Don't you dare tell me. What to do, Bill? She hissed, whirling on him. This is the principle of the thing. He's a predator. He's taking advantage of a simple mistake. It wasn't a mistake the third time, ma'am, Marcus interjected coldly. It was a pattern. A porch light flickered on next door. An elderly man in a bathrobe, George Peterson, peered out his front door. Everything all right over? There. Heard some shouting. Carol's face flushed a deep mottled red. The dispute was no longer private. It was a spectacle. Her carefully curated neighborhood image was shattering in real time, right on the doorstep of the man she had tried to bully. The thought of George relaying this story to the neighborhood bridge club was clearly more terrifying to her than any legal threat. That was the tipping point. The public shame. Fine, she spat, the word tasting like acid in her mouth. She snatched the pen and the trespass agreement from Marcus. She didn't read it. She slammed the paper against the wall of the house and scrawled a furious, jagged signature at the bottom. It looked less like a name and more like a wound. There, she said, thrusting it back at him. Now, the money? She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unlock it. What's your account? Marcus calmly recited his phone number for the digital payment. He watched as she navigated her banking app, her thumb jabbing at the screen. A moment later, his own phone buzzed. A notification appeared. You have received $500 from Carol Miller. He looked from the notification to her face. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. Payment received. Agreement signed. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll see if I can clear the fault code. No guarantees, of course. This is a delicate system. He left them on the porch, closing the door softly behind him. He didn't do it to be dramatic, but the effect was devastating. He was in his sanctuary, in control, while they were left outside, supplicants waiting for his favor. He walked to his office, sat down, and brought up the diagnostic panel for Project Nightshade. He could have cleared the code with a single keystroke. Instead, he made them wait. He let a full 5 minutes pass, an eternity for the two people standing in the cold night air. He pictured Carol on his porch, stewing, the $500 gone from her account, the signed confession in his possession. He wanted the lesson to sink in. He wanted her to understand the concept of consequences. Finally, he typed the release command. Fault code 7B clear. Initiate unlock sequence. On the security feed, he watched the small indicator light on the charging port of her SUV blink amber 3 times, then go out. He heard, even through the thick walls of his house, a loud, satisfying thunk click as the locking pin in her car retracted. He returned to the front door and opened it. I believe you'll find the connection has been released, he said, his tone as neutral as a surgeon informing a family that the operation was complete. Carol didn't say a word. She stormed past him, down the steps and to her car. She ripped the charging cable from the port with a violent tug and let it crash to the pavement. She threw herself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and fired up the engine. Without so much as a backward glance, she peeled out of his driveway, the squeal of her tires a final, impotent scream of rage into the night. Bill lingered for a moment. I'm really sorry about all this, he mumbled, his eyes fixed on the ground. Marcus just nodded. Have a good night, Bill. The man gave a sad, defeated little wave and shuffled back across the street, a lonely figure heading home to face the fallout. Marcus picked up his heavy-duty cable from the ground, coiled it neatly, and hung it on its hook. The battle was over. He had won. When he went back inside, Sarah was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, her arms crossed. I heard the whole thing, she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. A digital release fee? Seemed appropriate, he said, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. He showed her the payment notification on his phone. My God, she breathed, shaking her head in disbelief. "You're terrifying." "I'm glad you're on my side." "Me too," he said, wrapping his arms around her. He felt a sense of profound satisfaction. He had faced down a bully not with anger, but with intellect. He had used her own sense of entitlement as the bait and his own skills as the trap. He had protected his home, his property, and his peace. For the next few days, an unspoken truce seemed to settle over the neighborhood. The white SUV was never in his driveway. When he saw Carol getting her mail, she would immediately turn her back, refusing to make eye contact. The silence was a victory in itself. He had drawn a line, and she was finally respecting it. He and Sarah used the $500 to buy a ridiculously expensive bottle of scotch and a new rose bush for the front garden. It felt like justice. He started to think that was the end of it. He'd underestimated her. He'd won the battle over the Charger, but he had inadvertently declared a war of attrition, and Carol was a master of that particular game. A week later, he was checking his mail when he found it. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope with the official crest of the Westmere Heights Homeowners Association. It wasn't a newsletter. It felt heavy, formal, ominous. He opened it in the kitchen, Sarah looking over his shoulder. His eyes scanned the dense, jargon-filled text. It was an official notice of violation. "What is it?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Marcus read the words aloud, his voice flat with disbelief. "Violation of Bylaw 7.4, subsection C, unapproved aesthetic modifications to property exterior. It says the color of our front door is not on the pre-approved palette of acceptable community color schemes. We have 14 days to repaint it to an approved shade or face a fine of $100 per day." Sarah stared at him. "Our front door? It's navy blue. It was navy blue when we bought the house. Half the doors on this street are non-standard colors." Marcus continued reading, his gut twisting into a cold knot. "This violation was brought to the board's attention via a formal signed complaint by a concerned community member." He didn't need to see the signature. He knew exactly who had filed it. Carol hadn't just found a new angle of attack. She had weaponized the very rules of the community against him. The Charger was a direct confrontation. This was different. This was insidious. It was a bureaucratic war of 1,000 paper cuts. She couldn't touch his Charger, so she was coming for his door, and his hedges, and the placement of his garbage cans, and anything else she could find. The $500 invoice had not ended the conflict. It had merely purchased him a ticket to a whole new level of suburban hell. The navy blue door became a symbol of their defiance. For 3 days, Marcus and Sarah did nothing, a silent protest against the absurdity of the HOA's notice. It was a futile gesture. On the 4th day, 2 more cream-colored envelopes arrived. The key, first, was a violation for their garden hose holder. It was a simple dark green plastic model, and apparently it was not of a natural or earth-toned material, as stipulated by the landscape code. The second was even more ludicrous, a warning that the small flag Sarah had placed in her planter box for the upcoming national holiday was 3 inches taller than the 18-inch maximum allowed for temporary decorative accents. "She's measuring our flag?" Sarah's voice was a mixture of outrage and exhaustion. "She's walking onto our property with a tape measure?" "She's not just attacking us, she's enjoying it," Marcus said, laying the 3 violation notices on the kitchen counter. They looked like official documents from a petty, tyrannical government. "This is her new hobby. She sits at her window with a copy of the bylaws and a pair of binoculars. This isn't about my Charger anymore. This is a siege." He knew he couldn't ignore it. The daily fines were designed to bleed them dry. Fighting each violation individually was the path to madness, a whack-a-mole game he was destined to lose. His only option was to appeal directly to the source, the HOA board. The monthly meeting was held in the chilly, sterile community clubhouse, a room that smelled faintly of chlorine from the adjacent indoor pool. About a dozen residents were scattered amongst the folding chairs. At the front of the room, behind a long folding table, sat the three-person board. There was Richard Hemlock, the president, a man in his late 50s with a perfectly coiffed silver mane and a condescending smile permanently affixed to his face. Beside him was Brenda, the treasurer, a stern-looking woman who peered over her spectacles like a hawk searching for financial discrepancies. The third member was a younger man who looked deeply uncomfortable, as if he'd been forced to be there, at gunpoint, and sitting in the front row, notepad and pen in hand, was Carol. She met Marcus's gaze with a look of pure, triumphant malice before turning to whisper something to Richard, who nodded sympathetically. The fix was in. When the floor was opened for resident concerns, Marcus stood up, holding his 3 violation notices. He spoke calmly and logically. He explained that the door was the same color as when they'd purchased the home, implying it had been tacitly approved by the board's own inspection. He presented a packet of photos he'd printed, showing 15 other homes in the neighborhood with non-approved door colors. Richard didn't even look at the photos. "Mr. Weaver, the previous board's oversights do not concern us. A violation is a violation. The fact that other homes are also in violation is irrelevant to the matter of your home." "With all due respect, Richard," Marcus countered, "it speaks to a pattern of selective enforcement. I'm being singled out." "The board acts on complaints it receives," Richard said smoothly, steepling his fingers. "We received a complaint about your door. We are obligated to act." Carol raised her hand, a caricature of civic duty. "If I may, Richard," she said, standing up, "as the person who filed the complaint, I want to say this isn't personal. It's about maintaining the aesthetic harmony of our community, which directly impacts our property values. Some of us take the rules seriously because we care about our collective investment." Her speech was a masterpiece of passive aggression, painting Marcus as a rogue element threatening the financial stability of the entire neighborhood. Marcus felt his temper fraying. "This isn't about property values. This is a retaliatory action because I stopped you from illegally using my property." The room went quiet. Richard's smile tightened. "Mr. Weaver, this is not the forum for personal disputes. We are discussing the bylaws. Your other 2 violations, the hose holder and the flag, are also clear-cut. Are you disputing the measurements?" "I'm disputing the harassment." Marcus's voice rose, and he knew he'd lost his cool, which was exactly what they wanted. "I'm being targeted by a neighbor who is abusing the HOA's own rules to run a campaign of intimidation." "Your tone is unacceptable," Richard said, his voice dripping with condescension. "The board finds all 3 violations to be valid. You have 10 days to rectify them before the daily fines of $100 per violation commence." Next item on the agenda. Marcus stood there, speechless. He was dismissed, humiliated. He looked around the room at the other residents. Some looked away, not wanting to get involved. Others just looked bored. No one was coming to his defense. He had been outmaneuvered, legally and socially. Carol shot him a triumphant smirk as he walked back to his seat, his ears burning. He had walked into her arena, played by her rules, and been summarily executed. The drive home was silent and heavy. Sarah could see the defeat on his face. "So we have to repaint the door," she said softly as they pulled into the driveway. "And buy a new hose holder. And a smaller flag," he finished, his voice hollow. "And then what? What does she find next week? The brand of our doormat? The chemical composition of our lawn fertilizer?" "We could sell the house," Sarah whispered, and the fact that she was even considering it told him how desperate she felt. "No," Marcus said, a hard edge returning to his voice. "No, we are not getting chased out of our own home by that woman." That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat in his office, the 3 violation notices spread out before him like a tarot reading of a miserable future. He had tried logic. He had tried reason. He had been met with a bureaucratic brick wall. Carol and Richard weren't interested in fairness. They were interested in power. They were using the HOA rulebook as a cudgel. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the complex network diagram on his wall, a relic from a past project. He thought about how he approached cybersecurity threats. You don't just patch one vulnerability. You don't just block one attack. You do a full system audit. You find every weakness, every exploit, every backdoor. You expose the flaws in the entire architecture. He had been fighting the individual violations. He had been playing their game. It was time to change the game. He swiveled to his computer and pulled up the Westmere Heights HOA website. He navigated to the Governing Documents section and clicked on the link. A massive 280-page PDF downloaded the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, CC&Rs. It was the neighborhood's constitution, a dense, labyrinthine document filled with archaic legal language, clauses, subclauses, and amendments. Most residents had never read past the first page. To Marcus, it was source code, and he was about to become its most diligent debugger. He poured himself a large glass of the victory scotch, the irony not lost on him. He opened the PDF and began to read. He read every single word. He read about acceptable fence heights and satellite dish placement. He read about the precise chemical balance required for the community pool. He read about the approved species of deciduous trees for front lawns. For the next 3 days, Marcus was a man possessed. He converted the entire PDF into a searchable text document. He bought a subscription to the county's public plat map server. He cross-referenced property lines with setback requirements outlined in the bylaws. He used Google Earth's historical satellite imagery to check for unapproved sheds, patios, and landscaping modifications that had been built over the past decade. He wrote a simple script that scraped the text of the CC&Rs for every actionable rule, every measurable standard, and organized them into a categorized spreadsheet. Column A, the bylaw. Column B, the specific requirement. Column C, the penalty for non-compliance. He became an expert in the arcane laws of Westmere Heights. He learned, for example, that according to Bylaw 11.2, all residential mailboxes had to be repainted every 2 years with a specific brand and color of black paint. He learned that Bylaw 9.6 prohibited visible basketball hoops unless they were transparent acrylic. He learned that Bylaw 14.7 required all homes to have their exterior windows professionally cleaned a minimum of once per year, with receipts available for inspection upon request. He wasn't just finding rules, he was finding violations. Dozens of them. Hundreds. On every single street. The entire neighborhood, he realized, was a minefield of non-compliance. People had been living their lives, making small changes to their homes, blissfully unaware of the petty, draconian rules they were breaking. The HOA only enforced them when someone like Carol decided to weaponize them. And that was Richard's mistake. He and Carol had shown Marcus the weapon. Now, Marcus was going to show them how to use it. He spent the weekend methodically documenting his findings. He didn't just list the violations, he treated it like a professional cybersecurity audit. For each infraction, he included the bylaw number, a clear description of the violation, a high-resolution time-stamped photograph, and the prescribed penalty. He put it all together into a sleek, professional report, complete with a table of contents, an executive summary, and appendices. He printed 5 copies and had them spiral-bound at a copy shop. On Monday morning, exactly 1 week after the HOA meeting, a courier delivered a thick, heavy package to Richard Hemlock's front door. Richard, enjoying his morning coffee on his immaculate back patio, signed for it with a curious frown. He took it inside, opened the cardboard mailer, and pulled out the report. The title on the cover was stark and profuse. The silence that followed the delivery of Marcus's audit was heavier and more menacing than any shouting match. For 48 hours, there was no response. No angry phone calls, no blistering emails, no one marching up his driveway. It was the unnerving calm in the eye of a storm. And Marcus knew it was the sound of his opponents scrambling, realizing that the ground had crumbled beneath their feet. The first tremor came in the form of a phone call from Bill, Carol's husband. "Marcus, it's Bill Miller," he said, his voice a strained whisper. She's going insane. She got a copy of your book. She's talking to lawyers, to Richard. She thinks she can get you for harassment, for stalking. Everything in that report was compiled from public records and from observations made from the street, Bill, Marcus said calmly. It's the exact same standard the HOA uses. Tell her the only thing her lawyer will do is charge her a lot of money to tell her she has no case. I know that, Bill sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. Look, what do you want? Is there a number? Something to make this all go away? This was never about money, Marcus said, and for the first time Bill seemed to understand. This is about being left alone. Tell Richard to call an emergency community meeting. The entire neighborhood deserves to see how their HOA is being run. The call ended, and Marcus knew he had just lit the final fuse. Richard and Carol's strategy would be to isolate him, to paint him as an obsessive crank. So, Marcus took that option away. He spent the afternoon printing 200 copies of his audit's one-page executive summary. That evening, under the cover of darkness, he and Sarah walked the entire neighborhood, placing a single, neatly folded sheet in every resident's mailbox. The summary was a work of devastating simplicity. It didn't mention his personal conflict. It just stated the facts. A recent compliance audit has revealed over 200 systemic bylaw violations across the community. The current board's enforcement has been found to be inconsistent, targeting fewer than 2% of infractions. This report has been delivered to the board for their immediate action as per their fiduciary duty. The effect was instantaneous. The neighborhood's placid surface shattered. Next door and the community Facebook group erupted. People who had never read a single bylaw were suddenly panicked about the color of their mailboxes, the legality of their basketball hoops, the unapproved azaleas they'd planted last spring. The conversation was no longer about Marcus Weaver's blue door. It was about everyone's potential fines. Marcus hadn't just armed himself. He had deputized the entire community out of sheer self-interest. Richard was forced to call the emergency meeting. The clubhouse was packed. Every chair was filled, with residents standing 3 deep along the walls. The air was thick with anxiety and resentment. When Marcus and Sarah walked in, a hush fell over the room. He wasn't an outcast anymore. He was the man who held everyone's fate in his hands. He took a seat near the front as Richard, looking haggard and drawn, called the meeting to order. Carol sat beside him, her face a mask of rigid fury. "As you all know," Richard began, his voice lacking its usual smug confidence, "a report has been circulated by Mr. Weaver. This report is an unauthorized, deeply biased document, born out of a personal vendetta. It is an attempt to sow discord and chaos." "Is it inaccurate?" a man from the back shouted. It was George, the elderly neighbor, no longer in his bathrobe, but looking sharp and angry. "Because it says my garden gnome is a violation, and I'd like to know if I should start packing his little bags." The room broke out in a clamor of similar questions. Richard banged his gavel, his authority slipping away with every cry of outrage. "The board will take the report under advisement." He yelled over the noise. "We will review the alleged violations in due course, according to proper procedure." This was Marcus's cue. He stood up, and the room gradually fell silent, all eyes on him. He held a single copy of his full, spiral-bound report. "There's no need for a review, Richard," Marcus said, his voice calm and clear, easily carrying through the tense room. "The evidence is all in here. Photographs, bylaw citations, plat maps. It's all accurate. And you know it." He turned to address his neighbors. I didn't do this to cause chaos. I did this to demonstrate a point. For weeks, my family has been subjected to a campaign of targeted harassment by this board, instigated by my neighbor, Carol Miller, as retaliation for a personal dispute. Lies, Carol shrieked, jumping to her feet. He's a hostile, unneighborly person. Who thinks the rules don't apply to him? On the contrary, Marcus said, turning his cool gaze on her. I'm the only one who seems to have actually read the rules. The very rules you and Richard used to threaten me with hundreds of dollars in fines for the color of my door. I simply applied your standard of vigilant enforcement to everyone. It turns out if you apply the rules equally, almost everyone in this room is in violation of something, including you, Carol, and especially you, Richard. He let that sink in. The residents were no longer looking at him as the aggressor. They were looking at Richard and Carol as hypocrites. So we have a choice, Marcus continued, his voice resonating with authority. We can allow this to happen. The board can spend the next year levying tens of thousands of dollars in fines against all of us. We can turn on each other, measuring hedges and inspecting mailboxes until this stops being a community and starts being a police state. Or we can choose another path. He placed his report on the front table with a heavy thud. I am making a formal motion, he announced. First, a motion for a community amnesty. All existing and documented violations for every homeowner are forgiven, effective immediately. We all start with a clean slate. Second, a motion of no confidence in President Richard Hemlock demanding his immediate resignation from the board. And third, the formation of a bylaw review committee made up of resident volunteers to amend our outdated CC&Rs into something that reflects modern life, not the suburban anxieties of 1985. He looked directly at the board. That is my motion. Is there a second? Before the words were even fully out of his mouth, a dozen hands shot up. I second it, George yelled. Richard was sputtering. This is out of order. You can't. There's a procedure for. We're making a new procedure, Richard, someone else shouted. The energy in the room was electric. It was a full-blown insurrection. The residents, armed with the knowledge from Marcus's report, had realized the power had been with them all along. The vote was a formality, a landslide. Richard's face crumpled in defeat as he was voted out of his own little kingdom. Carol sat, frozen as the community she thought she commanded repudiated her completely. She looked small and powerless, her face ashen. The amnesty passed unanimously. The review committee was formed on the spot, with George volunteering to be its first chairman. In the space of 30 minutes, Marcus had not just won his war, he had rewritten the terms of peace for the entire neighborhood. In the weeks that followed, a new sense of calm settled over Westmere Heights. The blue door remained blue. The HOA, under new leadership, became a far more reasonable entity. The audit report became the stuff of local legend, a story told over backyard fences. Marcus thought that was the end, but true karma, he learned, has a long and ironic tale. One crisp autumn Saturday, about a month after the meeting, Marcus and Sarah were enjoying their coffee on the front porch. They watched as a large flatbed truck rumbled down the street and parked in front of Carol and Bill's house. What's that all about? Sarah wondered. They soon found out. A crew of workmen began using jackhammers to systematically demolish Carol's brand-new slate-paved driveway extension, the one she'd had installed specifically to make it easier to park her precious white SUV. George, walking his dog, stopped at their fence. "Morning, Marcus," he said with a cheerful grin. "Justice is a beautiful thing, isn't it?" "What happened?" Marcus asked. "Well," George explained, barely containing his glee, "turns out after our little revolution, folks started taking the bylaws seriously. Old man Hemmings from down the street, the retired surveyor, he noticed Carol's new driveway violated the property line setback and was causing water runoff into his prize-winning rose garden. He filed a formal complaint with the new board. They had no choice but to enforce it. A clear-cut violation of a major rule. She has to tear it all out. at her own expense. Marcus looked across the street at Carol, who was standing in her doorway, watching the destruction. The noise of the jackhammers was a deafening roar, the sound of her own tactics being turned back on her. The very system of rules she had wielded like a weapon had been picked up by a community she had alienated, and it had delivered a final, devastating blow. She wasn't the victim of a targeted attack from a single man. She was now facing the impartial, unyielding consequences of a community that had simply decided to follow the rules, a world she had created and now had to live in. Marcus took a sip of his coffee. He looked at Sarah, at his untouched blue door, and then back at the cloud of dust rising from his neighbor's shattered driveway. The trap he had set for her car had been a temporary fix. The trap he had laid for her character, her arrogance, her hypocrisy, had now finally brought a justice far more complete than he ever could have designed himself.